All right. In religion, we've been talking about Martin Luther, and we're coming up on the celebration of the Reformation, which is actually going to be this weekend because it'll already be November by next Sunday. So this weekend, most churches will celebrate the Reformation, at least Lutheran churches, and but we'll keep talking about Martin Luther next week because the 31st is really Reformation Day, even though you're going to celebrate Halloween probably. All right, so we've been talking a lot about him. Today, I want you to be on page 46. It looks like this. It says Martin Luther becomes a monk, and there's a bunch of pictures. Today, I'm really just basically going to read to you some things about those pictures so we can learn a little bit more about who Martin Luther was and kind of what it is that he was doing during that time. All right, so you can understand his life and what the world was like at the time a little bit better. All right, okay, so you're not going to have to do a lot. You're going to write two things, and that's actually what happened right now. Go to the very bottom where it says word study, and I really shouldn't have closed my book. Down at the bottom where it says word study, boop, 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 boop. Look there. And the first one says, a promise often one that is made to God. And that is actually going to be called a vow. V-O-W. So write that in on that first one. Okay? Right down here. Hang on, this is hard to do. Down here. Okay? Promise made to God. Vow. All right? Boop. V-O-W. Now, you might be familiar with that because sometimes when there's weddings, people make vows, and those are basically a promise that's made to God in your wedding. And monks would make vows at the monastery, and some of the vows would be things like not having money. Sometimes they would do a vow of silence where they wouldn't talk. So they did different kinds of things that were vows. All right. Then the second one was a man. Nope. There it is. A man who has promised to spend his life serving God by leaving his family and living with other monks, praying and working together. And since it says living with other monks, they kind of gave you the answer. It's a monk. M-O-N-K. And remember we talked about that's a weird name, and some people think of monkeys, which it has nothing to do with that. It just means that you're living apart from people, making certain vows to God, and trying to lead a good life. But we're going to see that with Martin, that was really, really difficult. It didn't help him shake that feeling that there's something else that's needed because he still felt inadequate with God. And we'll start looking at that. All right, so that very first picture, it has a picture of Martin, and he is in front of the university. So he's gone off to the university, and I'm going to read to you a little bit from the book. Luther was a good student. His father wanted him to become a lawyer, so Luther went to study at the University of Erfurt. But Luther wasn't happy studying law. Although Luther didn't know it, God had other plans for his life, and we read that book about Luther, and you probably remember that a little bit. Okay, and there he is saying, why did I ever want to be a lawyer? Because his dad wanted him to. So, also, he would have made a lot of money. So, but now he's thinking maybe that's not it. So now we go to the next picture where there's going to be a lightning bolt. Okay, one day when Luther was walking home, a big storm rolled in. Thunder and lightning were all around him. Luther was terrified. He prayed, Saint Anne, save me and I will become a monk. Luther got safely home, and soon after he sold his school books and said goodbye to his friends and went to join the Augustinian monastery. His father was very angry, but Luther thought that he was doing the right thing. He wanted to find a way to make his life right with God. So, that lightning scared him a lot. Now, whether he really said that or not, some people will kind of go, I don't know if he really said, Saint Anne, help me and I'll become a monk. But anyway, it had a big effect on his life. And it was something that made him want to join the monastery to become closer to God. And he thought that would make him closer to God. All right? Now I'll go down to the next one. And it's Luther confessing his sins and the weird hairstyle. Remember, we said that was a special hairstyle that the Augustinians wore. And so there's Luther with his haircut, and they would wear those brown robes all the time. That was their only clothing that they wore, and they wore it for everything. Okay? Being a monk wasn't an easy life. Luther had to work very hard. He prayed for hours every day. He confessed every sin that he could think of and did penance to make up for them. Penance is a punishment for sinning that the priest told Luther to do to show that he was sorry. While at the monastery, Luther also studied to become a priest. But Luther still couldn't find peace. He confessed more and more sins. He prayed harder and harder. He did all the things the church said that people who wanted to be right with God should do. He went without food and sleep for long periods of time and slept in the cold without a blanket. But Luther still couldn't find a way to be good enough to satisfy God. Luther knew he was still a sinner. He was still afraid of God's punishment. So if you look at the picture in that one, the other monk that he's confessing his sins to, that's going to tell him what to do for penance, is saying, "Are you done yet?" And he says, "No, I got a lot more sins to confess." And some of the people that he confessed to would get frustrated that he was confessing every single sin. It was like he wrote every single one down. Can you imagine if we wrote everything down that we did? Ooh, that'd be a long list, wouldn't it? Yeah. And so Luther was doing that, and he still didn't feel right with God. And he was doing things to kind of punish himself. And when we think about that, do you think God's happy if we punish ourselves because we sin? I don't think he's happy if we punish ourselves because he loves us. He doesn't want to see us punished. Do you think he likes it when we sin, though? I don't think he does. But instead of punishing ourselves, I think he's saying, well, let's try not to do that again, because he gives us the gift of forgiveness. That's not something that Martin Luther knows about quite yet. All right, let's continue on. Now, the next one has him on a bunch of steps. And we'll have to see what that is. If you remember the book, you might remember what this is. He is in Rome climbing stairs. After a few years, Luther was sent to visit Rome, the headquarters of the Roman Catholic Church. Luther was very impressed at first. He thought Rome was a wonderful, holy place because so many famous Christians had lived and died there, and there were so many special churches and places to visit. There was even a stairway that people said that Jesus had walked up when he was taken as a prisoner to Pontius Pilate. Luther decided to go up the stairs on his hands and knees to earn favor with God. But the longer Luther stayed in Rome, the more upset he became. He saw that the priests and the leaders of the church were doing sinful things. Some of them treated the Lord's Supper with no respect at all. They made fun of holy things and laughed at Luther for his faith. Luther was shocked to see how they broke the commandments in their daily lives. How could they behave like that? He went home again very unhappy. So there he is saying, surely this will work off some of my sins. And those things in Rome really weren't special in God's eyes, because they weren't necessarily things that could give you forgiveness. Only God can give you forgiveness, not climbing stairs on your knees. And so he saw that those that were in charge in the church were actually doing things that were really wrong and leading other people astray. And this started him thinking, boy, something's really wrong, and it just made him feel worse. So he went back to the monastery. Now look at the bottom picture. And here's a guy who's going to change Luther's life. Probably one of the most important men that Luther came in contact with, because he leads him to exactly what Martin Luther needs. Let's see what it says. Dr. Johann Staupitz was Luther's superior in the Augustinian order of the monks. If you notice, that's the guy that he was confessing his sins to in the other picture. It's the same guy. He was Luther's friend and teacher. Staupitz was worried about Luther. He told Luther that he should trust in the love of Jesus and stop worrying so much. He encouraged him to study the Bible. So, Staupitz knew that Jesus has love for us and not this hatred, and focus on that. Don't worry about other things. Focus on Jesus and his love. And he said, why don't you start reading the Bible? There's a shocking thing. Now, we talked about why he didn't read the Bible. There weren't very many around, right? God was working through Staupitz to help Luther. Staupitz was also dean of the religion department at the University of Wittenberg. He sent Luther back to the university to study and teach. Luther became a professor in Wittenberg, and he taught classes about the Psalms and the book of Romans. He kept studying the Bible, trying as hard as he could to understand what God wanted. And while he did this, God was working through his word in Luther's heart. Over a period of years, as Luther studied the Bible, he began to see that God truly did love him and forgave his sins freely. Not because Luther worked so hard to be good, but because of Jesus, who paid for the sins of the world on the cross. When Luther realized that, it changed his whole life. We'll hear that story in the next lesson. So, Staupitz leading him to the Bible and saying, you know what, you're going to teach classes about the Bible. If you're going to teach classes, you kind of have to study what you're going to teach. So Luther started reading through the Bible and looking at what it had to say for him. And he gradually started to realize that God's love is there. Not some kind of hatred for us, but love. And that's kind of where we're going to stop for today. We'll look at the next page on Monday, and it'll probably be a video again. All right, so have a great day, and God's blessings.